crowded US airport, an autistic girl named Ellie faces a meltdown when overwhelmed at security, until a working canine named Rex suddenly breaks protocol, leaves his post, and lies quietly beside her. What no one knows yet is, Rex isn't just any dog. He's someone from Ellie's past. This story isn't just about instincts. It's about memory, healing, and the silent bonds that outlast time. If you're drawn to stories that touch the heart and feel like they could happen tomorrow, like this video and subscribe for more. You won't forget what happens next. The terminal at Denver International hummed with 1,000 kinds of noise. Rolling luggage, flight announcements, the clatter of coffee cups, the low drone of conversations. But none of it made sense to Ellie. The lights above blinked too fast, too white. The floor tiles echoed her footsteps too loudly. And every time someone brushed by, her shoulders stiffened like they'd been struck. Ellie was 8 years old and traveling alone for the first time. A navy blue tag around her neck read in clear block letters, "Passenger with autism, needs extra time and patience." But no one seemed to notice. Or if they did, they pretended not to. Her fingers pressed tightly around the edges of her well-worn tablet, which glowed faintly with a paused animation of a fox walking through the woods. Ellie wasn't watching it anymore. Her eyes darted, unfocused, scanning the crowd. She could hear the wheels of a suitcase 5 gates down. She could hear the zipper of someone's backpack. She could hear a baby crying in waves rising and falling like the tide. It was all too much. She made it through check-in with help from a kind airline rep named Teresa, who had handed her off at the TSA security checkpoint with a quick pat on the shoulder and a cheerful, "You're doing great, sweetheart." But now Teresa was gone, and the man behind the security belt was frowning at her like she'd done something wrong. "Step forward, miss," he said again, louder this time. His voice was clipped, impatient. Ellie didn't move. "Do you speak English?" he added, glancing behind her as the line of passengers grew. A woman in heels sighed audibly. A man adjusted his watch. Ellie shifted her weight back and forth on her toes, making a quiet humming sound in the back of her throat. Her fingers tapped the screen of her tablet 3 times. Tap, 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 then again, like it was the only thing she could control in that moment. The security officer gestured to another staffer. "We've got a non-presentable minor, no guardian. Need female assist." "Hi there," she said, crouching down a little. "Sweetie, we just need you to put your bag on the belt, okay? You're gonna walk through this scanner and then go on your way. It's no big deal." Ellie's eyes locked on the movement of the woman's mouth but didn't register the words. Her breathing started to pick up. She took 1 step back. "Ma'am, we really need to keep this line moving," someone called out from behind. The TSA woman glanced up with irritation flickering across her face, then turned back to Ellie. The little girl was now visibly shaking. Her fingers were digging into the corners of her tablet case. Her lips trembled as her eyes filled, not with tears, but with fear. The kind of fear that doesn't scream or cry but folds inward and hardens. Suddenly, the tablet slipped from her grip and hit the floor. The screen cracked with a sharp, distinct pop. That sound, sharp, unexpected, broke whatever fragile thread was holding Ellie together. She collapsed to her knees, hands clamped over her ears, rocking back and forth, whispering something no one could quite hear. A ripple passed through the surrounding passengers. Some looked away. Some raised eyebrows. One woman took out her phone and started filming. "Can someone call her parent?" the female officer muttered, pulling out her radio. "She's an unaccompanied minor," the first officer replied, nunnely agitated. "Gate escort probably ditched her. This is why we need better protocols for these kids." But the words weren't for Ellie. They were about her, around her, over her. No one knelt down beside her. No one offered a quiet space or a softer light. No one thought to pause the conveyor belt or lower their voices. In the middle of the ever-moving airport, Ellie had stopped, and the world didn't. And then, from the far end of the terminal, a sound rose that cut through the buzz like a bell through fog. It was a bark, sharp, commanding, focused. Some passengers glanced toward it. A canine unit was nothing new, just a dog doing rounds with his handler. Except this time, the dog didn't just pass by. The German Shepherd paused, ears twitching. He lowered his head slightly, nostrils flaring. His handler tugged gently on the leash. "Rex, heel." But Rex didn't. Instead, his head swiveled toward the cluster of people by the security checkpoint. The scent, the energy, something about her pulled at something old in him. Something trained, yes, but deeper than that. Something he remembered, and in the next heartbeat, Rex made a decision. One that would change everything. Detective Mark Halley didn't notice it right away. He was focused on the queue at gate 22, watching Rex pace methodically beside him, alert but calm, every muscle responding to the leash like second nature. They'd done this loop 100 times before, sweeping the terminal for drugs, weapons, anything out of place. Rex was the most reliable dog in the unit, 4 years of active duty, no record of deviation, no misdetection, the perfect canine. The kind you brag about, the kind that saves lives without ever making a scene. But this time, something was off. It started with a subtle shift. Rex stopped dead in his tracks. No bark, no growl, just a sudden freeze, nose in the air, head tilted slightly eastward, toward the central TSA checkpoint. His body tensed like a drawn bow. Mark gave a short tug on the leash. "Rex, move," he said firmly. But Rex didn't move forward. He turned, just turned, slow and deliberate, and looked toward the crowd forming at the security lane. Then, without warning, he broke formation. "Rex!" Mark shouted, too late. The leash slipped from his hand and the shepherd bolted. In 4 strides, he was weaving through stunned travelers, ignoring the gasps and calls, a streak of black and tan urgency heading toward something no one else could see. In seconds, he was across the terminal floor, claws tapping sharply against the tile, muscles coiled with intent. The crowd parted almost instinctively as he surged past, a blur of motion moving against the current of distracted passengers and rolling bags. When he reached Ellie, no one understood what they were seeing. The girl was still folded into herself, arms around her knees, breath coming in shallow hiccups. Her lips moved, repeating something under her breath, unintelligible but rhythmic, like a broken song. Around her, TSA officers stood frozen mid-action. One had his radio half raised. Another held a clipboard as if unsure whether to write or shout. No one moved as the German shepherd skidded to a stop and lowered himself slowly to the ground. There was no bark, no display, no alert. Rex lay down. He lay beside her carefully, silently, his side pressed close to hers, not a muscle out of place, his head lowered until it touched the floor. His front paw extended gently, almost protectively, so that it barely brushed against the fabric of Ellie's jacket. His breathing slowed to match hers, sinking unconsciously, as if he were trying to tell her, "I'm here. I see you. You're safe." It took a moment for anyone to react. One of the TSA officers leaned in slightly, then backed away as if not trusting what he was witnessing. "Is he responding?" he asked aloud to no one in particular. Another officer squinted. "Not in the usual way. He's not giving any signal, no alert posture, no indication. That's not a bomb dog posture," someone else muttered. That Mark pushed his way through the perimeter, his badge flashing as he moved. "Rex," he called out, half furious, half panicked. He hadn't seen that dog run like that since a raid in Queens, and even then it had been under command. Now, as he approached, he saw it clearly. Rex wasn't detecting a threat. He was making a choice. The crowd, once tense with anticipation, shifted into an eerie hush. Phones were up. People were filming. But no one spoke. Mark approached slowly, crouching down. "Rex, talk to me. What is this?" But Rex didn't budge. He didn't even look up. His body remained still, like a statue made of breath and instinct. His ears weren't perked for commands. They were tuned to Ellie. Mark's eyes finally dropped to the girl. That's when he noticed the tag around her neck. "Passenger with autism." His chest tightened. A TSA supervisor stepped forward. "Your dog just left an assigned sweep without authorization. That's a serious violation." Mark didn't answer right away. He watched the girl. Her rocking had slowed. Her fingers still twitched, but now they hovered near Rex's paw. Tentative, curious. She reached forward, touched the soft fur behind his ear, and Rex leaned into it. Just slightly. Mark finally stood up. "He's never done this before. That doesn't change the fact. I'm not saying it does," Mark said sharply, then softened. "But maybe it's not about protocol right now. Maybe something else is happening here." Ellie was whispering now. Soft words. Not loud, Not loud anymore. Her hands moved to Rex's collar. Not to pull or grip, but just to rest there, like she was anchoring herself to the only thing in the room that felt steady. Someone in the crowd whispered, "Is that dog trained for that?" Mark shook his head slowly. "Not officially, he's Canine Unit Narcotics. But he used to be a therapy dog years ago. I read it in his original intake files, got retrained after his previous handler was injured. Haven't seen that side of him in years." The TSA supervisor scowled. "If he's crossing duty types, that's still reportable." Mark looked down again at the scene before him. The girl and the dog, still and silent in the middle of the chaos. It wasn't protocol, it wasn't policy, but it was something else. Something right. Rex, who had once taken down a drug runner behind a Miami nightclub without a scratch, was now still as stone, letting a child place her forehead against his neck as her breathing calmed further, her voice slowing into single-word fragments. The atmosphere around them began to shift. A nearby woman lowered her phone. A man put away his earbuds. No one said it out loud, but the mood softened. The kind of soft that only appears when something honest interrupts a machine of habit. Rex closed his eyes for a moment, ears still alert but body fully grounded. Ellie had stopped shaking. For the first time in minutes, maybe longer, she was still. And Mark, standing above them, couldn't shake the feeling that whatever this was, it wasn't over. Something had been set in motion now. Something that wouldn't be stopped by reports or reprimands. Something buried deep in Rex, and maybe deeper in Ellie too. And in that moment, somewhere between the slow shuffle of boarding announcements and the steady whirl of conveyor belts, the airport, just for a breath like, it had paused. But even then, out of sight behind gate 19, someone else was already making a call, watching, recording. A silent note had just been struck, and the reverberation hadn't reached its furthest edge yet. The silence broke first with a single, sharp voice. "That dog just breached protocol." The words came from a tall, broad-shouldered TSA supervisor named Randall Bishop, whose clipped tone and square jaw gave away his years in enforcement more than his badge ever could. He stepped forward, shoes thudding heavily against the tile, eyes locked on Rex like he was already writing the report in his head. "K9s don't get to improvise. That's not their job," he added, directing his gaze toward Mark Halley. "You know that." Mark stiffened, jaw tightening, standing protectively between Rex and the forming wall of uniforms. He didn't attack. He didn't cause panic. He lay down beside a child in distress. He left his handler mid-sweep, Bishop snapped. "The alone is enough for suspension. You want to explain to me why your certified K9 unit just disobeyed a direct leash command and engaged with a civilian without any authorization?" He responded to her. Mark said quietly, trying to keep his voice steady. The girl was overwhelmed. He picked up on something no one else did. "Don't get philosophical with me, Officer Halley," Bishop barked. "K9s are tools. Valuable tools, yes, but tools nonetheless. When they start making their own decisions, that's a liability. You want empathy, adopt a pet, don't bring it to a federal checkpoint." Mark opened his mouth to argue, but someone else interrupted. Someone from the outer rim of the circle that had gathered during the commotion. Actually, a calm voice said, "I think people might disagree with me." The crowd parted as a woman stepped forward, holding her phone tightly in one hand, the screen still lit up. She was in her early 40s, dressed in travel-worn jeans and a hoodie with the word Seattle printed across the front. Her hair was pulled into a messy bun, and around her neck hung a press lanyard. "I'm not TSA," she said plainly, "but I do work in media, and I just uploaded the full video of what happened here to our internal newsroom Slack." She turned her phone around and played the clip on speaker. The audio crackled with the buzz of the terminal, and then came Ellie's soft, fragmented murmuring, the sudden bark from afar, and the unmistakable sound of claws on tile as Rex charged toward her. Then silence, punctuated only by the sound of the girl's slowed breathing and the low hum of the dog lying beside her. "It's already got 20 shares, the woman continued, "and that's just our internal thread. We're a regional media hub. Some of our writers are already pinging me about it. And one of our digital team members, she's calling it the most human thing she's seen in weeks." Bishop took a slow breath, visibly trying to contain his frustration. "What, we're running security policy based on viral content now?" "No," the woman answered. But maybe you're not seeing what everyone else sees. That dog didn't malfunction. He tuned in. Around them, other passengers started checking their phones. The video had already made its way onto private messaging threads. Someone whispered, "It's on Instagram now." Another added, "Just got it in a group chat. My brother works for Delta and someone sent it to his crew WhatsApp." Her lips weren't moving anymore. The meltdown had passed, for now. She wasn't fixed, but she was anchored. Bishop turned his attention back to Mark. "You're not out of the woods. This isn't just a PR moment. It's a breach. You'll be writing this up in full. And your dog's certification? It'll be reviewed. Expect the board to get involved." "You'll write the report," Mark said evenly. "But I won't write that this was a failure. That'll be for others to decide," Bishop muttered, turning away, already pulling out his phone. As he walked off, Mark felt a low thrum beneath the surface of the terminal. The subtle way people watched now, some with awe, others with disbelief, and still others with their phones raised. The algorithm had already taken the story. From behind the baggage claim barrier, a young airport employee named Victor was watching on a break. He had seen the tail end of the event, the girl, the dog, the shouting, and now the dispersing tension. Curious, he searched for keywords on TikTok. Denver Airport Dog Girl. Within seconds, the video popped up. In the 30-second clip, the pacing audio trend made it strangely emotional. The caption read, "He clicked share." Across the concourse, an off-duty pilot saw the same video from a pilot group chat. An airline rep standing at a kiosk saw it pop up on her Twitter feed. A ground technician's teen daughter texted it to her dad asking, "Do K9s normally do this?" Ellie still hadn't spoken much, but her eyes had stopped darting. She was sitting cross-legged now, head leaned slightly on Rex's neck. TSA staff finally brought her a bottle of water, which she ignored, but she let them place it beside her. Mark crouched low again and murmured to Rex, "You made a choice, huh?" The dog didn't respond. His breathing was calm, his eyes alert. Behind Mark, two men in suits were walking quickly from the security wing, one carrying a clipboard, the other whispering into a headset. Bishop had clearly escalated things. "I need full incident footage from all terminal cameras," the man with the clipboard said to an officer. "Get us gate radio traffic between 11:05 and 11:15. Mark stood slowly, watching them. "You're making this into something bigger than it needs to be." The man with the clipboard didn't even glance at him. "It already is. Anytime a trained dog breaks leash and engages a civilian, it triggers an automatic review. And when that engagement gets uploaded online before the chain of command even sees it, that's a crisis. That's compassion." The man finally looked up, expression unreadable. "That's not your call to make anymore." And as more agents moved in, as the hallway buzzed with a different kind of tension, no one noticed the older woman sitting quietly near a vending machine, scrolling slowly through the clip for the third time. She didn't film it, she didn't speak, but her eyes stayed locked on the moment when Ellie reached for the dog, and he leaned into her touch without hesitation. She lifted her phone and dialed. She said into the receiver, "Pull all security requests tagged K9 anomaly from this terminal today. No, don't ask, just do it. We might have something unusual unfolding, and I want it off internal servers before anyone gets cute about PR permissions." She hung up and stood, smoothing out her coat, as she stepped into the flow of the terminal crowd. No one noticed her pass by, but she was already on her way to the command deck upstairs, where incident reports turned into headlines, or were erased before they ever reached a screen. And at the same moment, somewhere deep in the airport's digital network, an unnamed staffer pulled the original video footage from CCTV and sent it, anonymously, to a contact in public safety journalism with a single note attached. This dog broke the rules. To follow something bigger. It happened just as the investigation team was beginning to tape off the area. The buzz of radios and the constant echo of foot traffic filled the terminal with static tension. But none of it reached Ellie. She sat curled against Rex's thick coat, her small hands resting on the loose folds of his vest. Mark stood off to the side, arguing quietly with an administrative officer over a pending suspension notice. But none of them heard the hurried footsteps cutting through the noise. Shoes striking tile, a bag bouncing on one shoulder. The kind of panicked rhythm only a mother could make. "Ellie," the voice tore through the terminal, slicing across heads and turning strangers into silent witnesses. A woman burst through the security checkpoint, hair disheveled, breath uneven, eyes wide with fear and disbelief. She was in her mid-30s, dark curls sticking to her forehead, one hand clutching a passport and the other visibly shaking as she pushed past startled TSA staff. Mark looked up just in time to see her fall to her knees beside the girl. "Ellie, baby, are you okay?" The child didn't answer. She didn't flinch, didn't speak, but her body shifted imperceptibly, just a slight lean, not away but toward. A small signal that she had heard her mother's voice. The woman pulled her daughter into a half-embrace, one hand still hovering near Rex, uncertain whether to touch. I got a call from United," she said breathlessly to no one in particular. "They said she'd been held up at security, then nothing. I've been calling for an hour. They said a dog approached her and now, what is this?" "Get a sensory shutdown," said a calm voice. It was Mark, stepping forward slowly. "Rex, my dog," he responded. Not by command, not by training, just responded. The woman's eyes filled with tears as she looked down at the German Shepherd. Her breath caught. Her mouth opened as if to speak, but no words came. Mark noticed the shift in her expression. "Do you recognize him?" he asked quietly. The woman nodded slowly, stunned. She had one, years ago. His name was Bruno, a therapy dog. He was the only one she ever opened up to after her diagnosis. He'd do this exact thing. Pressure grounding, the leaning, the quiet eye contact, everything. But he died. 3 years ago, car accident. They told us he didn't make it. "Your agency was he with?" Mark asked, tone carefully. "A local therapy program partnered with state services. We adopted him after months of waiting. He was with us less than a year when it happened. My husband was driving, there was a semi, it happened so fast, they took him for evaluation but the report came back inconclusive. Then they sent a letter saying he had to be put down. Too many injuries. I never saw him again." Mark was silent. He knelt down, one hand gently touching Rex's collar. "He was a transfer," he said, "from a state therapy roster, reassigned to canine narcotics 2.5 years ago after a long rehab stint in our facility. Different handler before me. They said he had—" "Is this Bruno?" Her eyes welled again. "Is this him?" Mark looked at Rex, then back at her. He responds to Rex now, but he didn't finish the sentence. Because in that moment, Ellie, without speaking, reached for Rex's left ear, near the base. Her fingers brushed the underside and she pressed the pad of her thumb against the small, faint scar. The mother gasped. "That's where the stitches were," she whispered. "After the accident, he wouldn't let anyone touch that spot except her." Rex didn't move. He let her touch it. His tail gave a single, slow thump against the tile. Then another. And then he turned his head and licked Ellie's hand. Mark felt his throat tighten. "Jesus," he murmured. "It really is him." From across the hall, someone watching the moment unfold tapped their phone screen and whispered, "It just hit national trending." The media woman from earlier stepped closer, not recording, just observing. "You're the odds of this?" she asked softly. Mark shook his head. "1 in a million?" Another TSA agent stepped forward, confusion drawn across his face. "You're telling me this dog somehow made his way from therapy to narcotics, without any record of who he used to be?" Mark looked over. The system doesn't track emotional history, just physical readiness. If he passed behavior assessments and had enough cognitive response, they could have reclassified him as usable in law enforcement. The fact that he passed at all might say more about what he was trying to survive. Her head stayed resting on Rex's flank. "I thought we lost him," she said. "Maybe he thought he lost you too," Mark replied. Another voice spoke up from behind them. It was an older man, one of the senior handlers from the unit, gray at the temples. Arms crossed. "I remember that intake," he said. "We called him Bruno for about a week until we got his new papers. He didn't respond to much, wouldn't eat for days, refused to sleep unless someone played classical music. That's what we did for him," the mother said. "Ellie would play violin recordings. He used to fall asleep with his head on her lap." The handler nodded slowly. "Well, that explains some things." Mark exhaled. "How did we miss this? No chip scan?" the handler asked. "Different ID chain. He had a new tag issued under Rex. Probably got swapped after the accident during reassignment. Nobody ever checked his emotional triggers." "It did," Mark said softly. but he never showed them to me, until today, and just then, over the airport intercom, a voice announced, "All gate traffic delayed 15 minutes, due to system-wide maintenance." No one moved, and somewhere on a secure server in a regional command office, the footage from earlier was being downloaded again. This time with audio logs attached by someone who didn't usually flag such things, but had paused when they heard the name Bruno whispered 3 times in the span of 5 minutes. The timestamp read 12:14 p.m. The metadata was labeled Anomaly Reconnection, Review Pending. The air in the terminal had changed. It was no longer buzzing with impatience or tension, but with something heavier, still but charged. Ellie remained nestled against Rex, and her mother, whose name was June, sat beside them, her hand resting protectively near her daughter's shoulder. Mark stood a few feet away, arms crossed tightly, as airport security and K9 unit personnel began to gather, not just to question but to understand. It wasn't often that a dog's identity unraveled in real time before a crowd of strangers. And yet here they were, watching as something previously filed away as coincidence slowly took the shape of something much deeper. Across from them, the senior handler named Wallace retrieved a battered manila folder from his leather duffel. He sat on a bench and spread the papers on his lap, fingers scanning rows of old intake notes. "These aren't complete," he muttered, mostly to himself. "There's no emotional history, no civilian attachments listed. This should have included therapeutic flags if he was ever certified in that category." "He wasn't a city program," June said softly, not looking up. "We got Bruno through a privately funded therapy initiative. Small nonprofit in Fort Collins. He was on loan from a handler before us who trained dogs for PTSD veterans. The program got dissolved after their main sponsor passed away. I remember asking what would happen to the dogs. They said most were being reassigned to new homes or retired." She paused. "We thought that meant adopted, not converted." Wallace frowned. "Without centralized tagging, dogs like him could fall between systems. If the therapy records were paper-based and the K9 records digital, there's no protocol to match them unless someone flags something unusual." Mark's voice was low. "So he came into our unit as a blank slate? Just sanitized?" Wallace handed him a yellowed sheet. "Intake says he was picked up after being abandoned by family following a traumatic loss. There's no reference to the accident, no civilian claim, no vet record. Just a physical scan, a behavioral test, and a note that he passed narcotic simulation with above-average response." June stared at the paper in disbelief. "We didn't abandon him. We were told he didn't make it." "I believe you," Wallace said gently. "But the system, it loses stories sometimes, turns living beings into numbers." His voice faltered. "We don't always question it." Ellie shifted, her cheek now resting against Rex's back leg. Her fingers moved across his fur slowly, almost methodically. Then she paused just above his left ear. Her hand hovered, fingers trembling. Everyone around her watched, no one daring to interrupt. Then, with the gentlest motion, she touched the small, faded scar hidden beneath the fur line. Rex didn't flinch. Instead, he let out a low, almost inaudible exhale, the kind of sound a dog makes when he recognizes something beyond smell or sight, something tied to memory. Ellie blinked once, then twice. Her lips parted. At first, there was no sound, but then, just loud enough to slip into the air between the silence, she whispered, "Bruno?" The name cut through the stillness like a beam of light through a heavy curtain. June gasped. Her hand flew to her mouth. "Ellie," she breathed, tears springing into her eyes. Mark took a step forward, stunned. Ellie looked directly at Rex. "Bruno," she repeated, this time with more strength, more certainty. The dog lifted his head slightly. His ears perked. Then he turned, not frantically, not even with surprise, but with recognition. His gaze met hers. For a long moment, no one breathed. Ellie reached forward and laid her hand gently on his chest. He leaned into her. "She hasn't spoken in public for over a year," June whispered. "Not even in therapy. Not with me. Not at school." Wallace sank slowly onto the bench beside the files. "Jesus Christ," he murmured. From behind the security desk, an airport administrator named Darnell watched the scene through a camera feed. He tapped a few keys on his terminal, trying to trace the intake record back through interagency archives. The screen blinked, then showed a yellow alert icon. "Data incomplete," the message read. prior records not migrated from legacy system, he turned to his supervisor. The original transfer file for K9 RX-143, it's missing the first 18 months of service history. There's no attachment documentation, no therapeutic clearance, no owner logs. The supervisor frowned. Wasn't he transferred from Fort Collins PD? Technically yes, but the tag number from the original caller doesn't match the state system. Looks like he came through as a recovered animal after trauma, got a new registry, and re-entered under different criteria. You're saying we may have re-aimed a therapy dog into a narcotics unit without knowing? That's exactly what I'm saying. Back in the terminal, Ellie now sat upright beside Rex. She hadn't looked around. She didn't care about the crowd or the uniforms or the dozens of quiet observers pretending not to record what was unfolding. She only cared that Bruno was here, warm and alive and breathing against her palm like he used to do when the world became too much. June looked at Mark, her voice unsteady. Do you know what this means for her? I think I'm starting to, he replied, unable to take his eyes off them. Wallace stood and gathered the loose pages in silence. He reached into his bag again and pulled out a flash drive. It's not complete, but it has his original temperament logs. Might help when you go up against review. Mark nodded, slipping the drive into his jacket. Thank you, I'll take it to the board myself. Someone behind them cleared their throat. One of the airport PR managers. A woman in a blazer with impeccable posture and tired eyes. We're getting inquiries now. The clip's gone viral. News outlets are asking for comment. Do we have a story yet? No, Mark said quietly. We don't have a story. We have the truth. And it just started speaking again. The woman scribbled something in her notepad, then stepped back. As the light above gate 24 flickered and another flight delay echoed overhead, Ellie reached for Rex's leash. Not to pull it, not to lead, just to hold it, like a child remembering how to tether herself to the only thing that ever made sense, when words failed. And as her fingers curled around the worn leather, something at the edge of the terminal shifted again. Not noise, not motion, but the quiet breath of a story beginning to wake, not from sleep, but from silence. In the control room overlooking Concourse C, Director Harold McKinney leaned against the cold surface of the operations table, jaw tight, watching the playback of the viral video now being broadcast in snippets across several major news outlets. The room was quiet, except for the overlapping voices coming from 3 monitors. One displaying a conservative panel debating whether K9s were becoming too emotionalized for serious duty. Another with a psychologist explaining sensory shutdowns in children with autism. And a third showing a grainy TikTok replay of Rex lying beside Ellie, overlaid with soft music and the caption, "Some instincts can't be trained, they're born." Harold exhaled sharply and turned to his chief of public affairs. "Get it pulled," he said flatly. "A video. The original one from our cameras. Internal uploads. I want them gone. I want every trace deleted from our intranet. And I want a statement ready in the next hour that confirms this incident was a result of improper canine response, under duress." The woman blinked. "You want us to call it a malfunction?" "I want this off the national radar," Harold said, stepping closer. "We have a canine unit that broke leash protocol at a federal checkpoint, engaged physically with a minor civilian, and is now the centerpiece of a viral narrative. We're not in the business of sentiment. We're in the business of structure. And right now, structure is bleeding." He looked toward the terminal camera feed where Mark, June, Ellie, and Rex were still seated on the floor. "If this becomes precedent," he added, "you'll have every dog handler in the state second-guessing control in the name of emotion. That is not the story we will tell." In a janitor's supply closet 3 floors down, the air smelled faintly of disinfectant, old rubber. Miguel Ortiz adjusted the volume on the small radio clipped to his belt and carefully unwrapped the last corner of his sandwich. He'd been working at the airport for 9 years, long enough to know when something unusual was happening without needing an official memo. The whispers on the walkie-talkies, the sudden presence of suits in terminals, and the way people avoided eye contact, all pointed to something bigger than a delay. He opened the staff app on his old phone and pulled up the link a coworker had texted earlier. It was a local repost of the original clip, still intact, no edits. The moment when Ellie whispered, "Bruno," hit Miguel harder than he expected. Not because of the media coverage, not even because of the dog, but because he'd heard that exact tone from his own daughter Sophia years ago, when a golden retriever named Marley at their school first helped her through her first classroom meltdown. Miguel swallowed hard. He looked down at his phone, then back at the radio. The official statement from management had just come in through staff comms. Internal footage of the recent canine-civilian interaction is being removed for compliance review. All personnel are to refrain from sharing or commenting on the incident without clearance. The canine in question has been flagged for retraining and possible reassignment. Public inquiries should be referred to the media unit. He read it twice, the wording sitting bitter in his chest. Flagged, reassignment. Like the dog was a broken tool. He looked again at the screen, at the image of a child finding language again, of a creature reconnecting with something it wasn't supposed to remember. His thumb hovered for a moment, then moved with quiet certainty. He downloaded the highest quality version of the clip, the one with terminal ambient sound intact, stored in a folder used mostly for training videos. Then, he opened a private encrypted email account. He typed a brief message unsigned. The girl is autistic. The dog was not trained to respond this way, but he did. Because he knew her. Please make sure this doesn't disappear. He attached the file and sent it to a contact he'd saved over a year ago after attending a seminar on disability rights, hosted by the Child Protection and Advocacy Coalition. He had never contacted them before, but today felt like the reason why he'd kept that email. Upstairs, in a media conference room now sealed off for internal review, Harold paced. Damage control protocol is in place. Now we need a closed narrative. He pointed at a young intern nervously holding a printed copy of Ellie's travel profile. This document shows the child traveled alone under the airline's special needs minor program, yes? The intern nodded. And that there was no medical emergency reported? Another nod. Then our summary is simple. The dog was exposed to elevated passenger stress, misinterpreted nonverbal distress cues, and deviated from standard behavior. Period. What about the mother's claims? Someone else asked. That the dog is a match to her previous therapy dog? Harold waved it off. Unverifiable, no chip confirmation, no matching ID. That detail does not go in the statement. Meanwhile, back on the terminal floor, Ellie had stood up. Not quickly, not confidently, but upright. She was holding Rex's leash gently, and he followed her movements with the precision of something deeply familiar. June stood a few feet behind, watching her daughter take a few tentative steps forward. Wallace, the senior handler, stayed quiet, arms crossed. He had been in the room with too many dogs who were never given a second chance, not because they failed, but because they responded in ways no protocol could translate. He stepped toward Mark. You know they're going to erase this. Mark didn't respond at first. We won't let them. At that very moment, in a small nonprofit office 2 states away, a staffer at the Child Protection and Advocacy Coalition opened her email inbox and clicked on a message marked, "No subject." She played the clip twice, then forwarded to the board chair with a 3-word note. "This needs noise." Back in the janitor closet, Miguel sat quietly. His break had ended 5 minutes ago, but he didn't move. His daughter's last IEP report was folded in his back pocket, where he kept it as a reminder of how far she'd come, and how few people understood what it meant when a child with autism trusted something without words. He looked once more at the now deleted link from the airport's internal bulletin. Then he powered off his radio, opened the closet door, and walked back into the corridor unnoticed, just another shadow among thousands. But in his chest, something steady pulsed. Not defiance, not rebellion, just the unwavering beat of a father who'd seen truth and refused to let it be swept away with the rest of the trash. The clip had not just survived, it had spread. Within 48 hours, it had been translated into 6 languages, featured on 3 national morning shows, and reached over 20 million views across platforms. The official statement from Denver International Airport, sterile, procedural, and conspicuously emotionless, but it wasn't until a particular voice emerged that the tide truly began to turn. Major Helen Reyes, retired canine handler and former director of the Federal Canine Response Program, appeared on a primetime interview late Wednesday evening, sitting in a modest studio with no makeup, no agenda, and a look that had seen too many versions of the truth erased. "That dog," she began, voice calm, did not break protocol. He enacted a form of response that is rare but not unknown, especially among therapy-integrated canines trained in dual environments. The host blinked. Are you saying Rex was trained to comfort children? Helen gave a slight smile, not unkind. I'm saying he remembered how. There's a difference. Dual-certified dogs, those initially trained in therapeutic response and later reassigned, often retain latent behavior patterns when exposed to triggering cues. This is not emotion overruling instinct. This is instinct refined by training, acting when words failed. Across the airport's back hallways in a maintenance lounge turned ad hoc press room, Mark watched the segment on his phone with Wallace and June nearby. Ellie sat on the floor again with Rex's head in her lap, slowly brushing a soft cloth over his fur. The dog didn't move, just watched her with that quiet awareness that had redefined everything. Wallace broke the silence. She's not wrong. This level of connection, this kind of response, it can't be reprogrammed. Just the stimulus is strong enough. It comes back. The fact he even recognized her. June looked over. But why wasn't it caught earlier? He's been in active duty for years. No one saw it? Maybe no one wanted to, Wallace replied. Because therapy dogs don't get budgets like narcotics canines. They don't get the same insurance or gear. You lose a narcotics dog, it's an operational failure. You lose a therapy dog, it's a human story. He paused. And some agencies don't have room for stories. Outside the glass, reporters paced the edges of the terminal with long lenses, waiting for a glimpse of Rex or Ellie. But access had been restricted. Mark's department hadn't made a statement since the incident, which only fueled speculation. But someone else had started to speak. That someone stood alone by gate 23, uniform sharp, back straight. Officer Noah Jensen, 26 years old, quiet, competent, and easily overlooked in the first hours of the event, now stepped into the light. The moment had gnawed at him since it happened. Watching the dog break away, run toward the girl, lay beside her like he'd done it 1,000 times before. He had frozen that day, not because he didn't understand what was happening, but because something deep inside him had stirred, something old, buried, and unspeakably familiar. In a quietly recorded interview with a local affiliate, Noah sat down, hands folded on his lap. I was 9 years old when I stopped speaking, he said. His minor dad didn't come home from deployment. Something broke in me. My mom tried everything. Counselors, medication, speech therapy. Nothing worked. I was silent for over a year. He looked down, his voice steady. Then a dog came into my life. His name was Bruno. The camera didn't zoom, didn't pan, just stayed with him. He wasn't flashy. He didn't bark commands. He just sat next to me, followed me, matched my breath. Sometimes that's all it takes. He glanced up. He saved my life. I never knew what happened to him after the program ended. I only know that for a time, he was mine, and I was his. The interviewer leaned in. Are you saying Rex is the same dog? Noah nodded. I saw the way he looked at her, not like a stranger, not like an object, like someone who. A long silence. I wasn't supposed to talk about this. They told us to keep it clean, keep it off record. But silence doesn't protect truth. It buries it. Later that night, the station uploaded the clip. Within an hour, it had over 100,000 shares. People started piecing it together. Multiple children, years apart. Same dog. Therapy, and later, license to free immersion. Members of the system transfer made known application to their own personalities. Back at the terminal, Ellie curled up beside Rex, both of them finally asleep. Wallace stepped beside Mark and handed him a printout. Board meeting just got moved up. They're voting tomorrow. On what? Mark asked. Whether to remove Rex permanently. June overheard and stood up, voice sharper than before. They can't. Not now. Not after everything. Mark nodded. I'm not letting that happen. Across the room, Noah walked in, no longer hesitating. Then let me testify. I have deployment records, vet logs, early therapy notes. I kept everything. He wasn't just my dog. He was my turning point. Mark looked at him for a long moment. You're sure? Noah glanced at Rex. I'm more sure than I've ever been. And while upstairs, the airport's crisis team reworded their fourth version of the public statement, unsure how to control a story that had outgrown their grasp. Somewhere else, in a modest office in downtown Denver, an editor with tired eyes loaded Noah's footage into a primetime segment titled simply, "The Dog Who Didn't Forget." The boardroom wasn't built for emotional truth. Fluorescent lights, beige walls, metal chairs aligned in exact symmetry. Everything in the environment was designed to minimize disruption, to keep focus on policy, not people. But today, the room held more than guidelines and performance charts. It held a girl who had only recently found her voice again, a mother who refused to lose the same dog twice, a retired canine whose instincts defied bureaucracy, and an assembly of decision-makers walking a line between rules and reason. At the front of the room, Chief Director Harold McKinney adjusted his tie, his face a portrait of composed neutrality. "You have convened this session to evaluate the operational reliability of K9 Unit RX-143, hereafter referred to as Rex, and determine whether his behavior at Denver International constitutes a breach of training protocol or an exceptional case of permitted response. All testimony and demonstration will be recorded and reviewed under Section 3A of the Canine Operations Mandate." He looked around the table. "Mr. Halley, are you prepared to proceed?" Mark stood straight. "Yes, sir." "And is the minor's guardian present?" June stepped forward, her voice firm. "I am." Ellie sat beside her, quiet but alert, one hand resting on Rex's back. The room fell still. Harold cleared his throat. "In light of conflicting interpretations, we are authorizing an observational procedure, a controlled emotional reflex test to assess the claim that Rex exhibits therapeutic sensitivity consistent with prior psychological training. This test will be administered here, with one behavioral psychologist, 2 members of the Canine Ethics Committee present. Any objections?" There were none. The psychologist stepped forward, a man in his 50s with soft eyes and a notebook tucked under his arm. "My role here is not to provoke distress," he said gently, "only to guide Ellie through a mild series of emotionally ambiguous scenarios. No danger, no raised voices. We are watching for untrained, unsolicited responses from the animal. If Rex intervenes in a way consistent with therapeutic contact, it will be documented." He turned to Ellie, kneeling so they were eye level. "Hi, Ellie. You remember when dogs help people feel safe? That's all we're doing today. You're not being tested. Rex is. You can just be you." Ellie didn't answer, but she nodded once. Her fingers twitched slightly on the fabric of Rex's vest. The observers stepped into position, cameras aligned, one monitor capturing biometric readings from both the girl and the dog, heart rate, muscle tension, body temperature. Mark stood behind them all, arms crossed tightly, every nerve on edge. He knew Rex would respond, but he didn't know if this sterile room would understand it. The psychologist dimmed the lights slightly and began the first exercise, asking Ellie to hold a crumpled page and pretend it was a boarding pass she couldn't find. She hesitated, then followed through, eyes darting toward the exits. Rex remained seated, watching. The test continued. A dropped object, a question asked too quickly, a set of flashing lights from a simulation video, each element carefully chosen to mimic the overstimulation Ellie had experienced at the airport. Her breathing changed. Her foot started tapping rhythmically. The psychologist gave a slight nod to the observers. "Level 2, he whispered. Now he opened a small metal case and removed a familiar sound machine. With a flick of a switch, a low, unpredictable airport announcement tone played. Nothing piercing, but just irregular enough to unsettle. Ellie flinched. Her fingers went rigid. Her lips moved silently. The room noted. He walked forward slowly, steadily, then leaned his body directly across Ellie's chest and upper torso, gently but firmly pressing his weight onto her as he lowered himself down. His positioning was exact. Paws beside her ribcage, chest aligned with hers, head tucked slightly beneath her chin. Not a casual lie-down, not a trick, but a deliberate act known in therapy as deep pressure stimulation. A method proven to calm children in sensory distress by grounding their heartbeat through regulated weight. The monitors blinked. Ellie's pulse, which had been climbing steadily, began to drop. Her facial muscles softened. She blinked once, then again. Her fingers stopped twitching. She whispered one word, "Dave." A hush fell across the room. The psychologist looked toward the panel. No verbal command, he stated. No gesture or signal. He recognized her escalation and responded with a textbook pressure technique used in autism therapy. That is not standard canine response. That is clinical imprint memory. Mark felt his chest unclench for the first time in days. One of the medical observers, a pediatric neurologist, added, "This kind of response is exceedingly rare in transferred canines, particularly those redirected from therapeutic work into narcotics or enforcement." His ability to detect her escalation pattern, without eye contact or vocal distress, is, in my professional opinion, indicative of a previously conditioned bond. Harad adjusted his glasses, clearly unsettled but trying not to show it. "So you're confirming the response was valid but the underlying training is undocumented?" "Correct," the psychologist said, "but the emotional efficacy cannot be denied." Ellie, still beneath Rex's soft weight, reached up and touched his ear. "Bruno," she whispered again, and this time not only did the dog lift his head, he wagged his tail. Slow, deliberate. Just once. Silence hung in the air like dust after a long storm, not from lack of breath but from the collective realization that something irreversible had just happened. Rex remained pressed gently against Ellie's chest, unmoving but alert, the rise and fall of her breathing gradually syncing with his, like waves remembering how to return to shore. The board had gone still. The psychologist lowered his pen. The observers exchanged glances without speaking, and for the first time since the hearing began, Mark allowed his arms to fall to his sides. Ellie's whispered word, "safe," still echoed in the room, not just as a description of her state but as a verdict for the creature who had made it so. At the head of the long table, behind a modest nameplate that simply read "Chairwoman," a woman in her early 60s sat with her fingers steepled, and her eyes not on the girl or the dog, but on the gap between them, as if reading something invisible yet deeply familiar. Her name was Lucille Hartley, and she had chaired the Canine Standards and Ethics Board for 12 years, during which time she had signed over 3 dozen retirement authorizations and ruled on twice as many misconduct appeals. But this case had struck her differently, not because of the headlines or the pressure, but because of the name that had not been spoken in that room for over 20 years. Few people in the room knew the history. It wasn't public, and she never brought it into her work. But in the spring of 2003, her only child had suffered a severe panic attack during a layover at O'Hare. 14 years old, undiagnosed at the time, overstimulated and alone while transferring between flights. He collapsed in a crowded hallway. People mistook it for a seizure. Security called for medical, but not before a panicked passenger restrained him, thinking he was a threat. By the time help arrived, Aaron was silent. He never fully recovered. He died 18 months later during a second episode. This time at home. This time with no one there at all. Lucille had never forgiven the systems, airport, medical, educational, for how they failed to see what her son had been trying to say without words. She had joined the regulatory board a decade later, not out of bitterness, but as a quiet attempt to make sure no one else got silenced just because they didn't speak in time. Now, watching Rex perform a clinical or great therapeutic maneuver without prompt or order, she felt a ripple somewhere deep in her bones. Not just recognition, but grief reframed. She blinked once and leaned forward. "I'd like to make a motion," she said, her voice turned toward her, surprised by the sudden break from procedural flow. Lucille nodded to the medical observer. "You've confirmed the behavior was emotionally reactive, not performative." "Yes, ma'am," the neurologist answered. The response was consistent with deep pressure therapy application, and no commands were given. And the psychological specialist, "You've confirmed that this response falls outside standard narcotics canine conditioning." "Confirmed," he said. "It aligns more closely with Tier 2 therapeutic patterning." Lucille inhaled. "Then I am proposing we offer Canine Unit RX 143 immediate retirement, under the clause of honorably completed service due to exceptional circumstances. He will not be flagged for reassignment. He will not return to the unit. Instead, pending veterinary clearance, I propose he be certified as a companion therapy dog and placed in permanent care, with Ellie Underwood under a guardian-supervised plan." A moment of stunned silence followed. Mark straightened, hardly believing what he was hearing. June's hand flew to her chest. Ellie said nothing, but her eyes widened, and her fingers reflexively curled tighter into Rex's fur. One of the younger board members whispered, "But, Chairwoman, the precedent." Lucille turned. "The precedent is this. We are not arbiters of punishment when no harm has occurred. We are arbiters of potential, and this dog's potential has spoken louder than any memo ever could." She paused. "We have documented history of his prior training, independent testimony from 2 unrelated responses, and live evidence, undeniable, that his instinct can reach places no badge or protocol can." Wallace, standing in the back, let out a quiet breath he didn't know he'd been holding. Lucille looked at June. "Would you be willing to undertake a formal certification program to become his registered handler?" "Yes," June replied without hesitation. "Whatever's required." "And Ellie?" Lucille asked gently. "Do you want Rex to stay with you?" Ellie met her eyes. "His name is—" The room went quiet again, but it was a different kind of silence. One that felt like sunrise after a night too long. Lucille smiled softly. "Then Bruno he shall be." Behind her calm expression something loosened, a knot 20 years in the making finally letting go. She saw Aaron in Ellie's nervous hands, in the way her voice had returned not by therapy, not by coaxing, but by a being who understood her before she understood herself. And she saw in Bruno, formerly Rex, not a case file, not a misstep, but a lifeline. The kind her son never had. "Let the minutes reflect," Lucille announced, "that the board unanimously agrees to grant early retirement status to K9 RX-143, with full honors and final placement in certified therapeutic custody. Effective immediately." There were no objections. There were no hesitations. In the far corner, Mark blinked back something behind his eyes and reached quietly to scratch behind Bruno's ears. Bruno lifted his head, tail thumping once, twice. Lucille stood slowly. "This hearing is closed," and as the cameras were powered down, as files were gathered and staff began to pack up, no one noticed that the monitor displaying Ellie's biometric data still pulsed steady and calm. Proof, if anyone needed it, that sometimes rescue doesn't look like sirens and urgency. Sometimes it looks like a heartbeat aligning with another. The morning sun filtered through the high glass windows of Concourse B, casting golden reflections on the floor like quiet footprints left behind by someone determined not to disturb the world. Travelers moved about with their usual hurried cadence, rolling bags, cradling coffee, scanning boarding passes. But near Gate 18, something quieter unfolded. Ellie stood in line at the security checkpoint, her shoulders relaxed, her hair tied back in a soft braid, and in her right hand she gripped the leather leash of a German shepherd whose eyes watched everything but never once wavered from her. She didn't hold her mother's hand, not this time. June stood a few feet behind, close enough to step forward if needed, but far enough to honor what this moment meant. Ellie looked up at the TSA agent, handed over her passport, and when prompted to walk forward alone, she did, not with bravado, not with rehearsed confidence, but with the steady, unbroken rhythm of someone who now had something more reliable than courage: trust. As she stepped through the scanner, Rex moved in perfect harmony beside her. No hesitations, no distractions. The buzzer stayed silent. The agent smiled, waved her through. Ellie turned, looked back at June, and gave the smallest nod, a gesture that, for them, said more than any sentence ever could. The waiting area beyond security was quiet for the hour. Ellie found a row of seats near the windows and sat cross-legged with a small sketchbook open on her lap. Rex lay beside her, eyes half-lidded, ears occasionally twitching at the rhythm of overhead announcements. Mark had walked them in earlier before heading off to his own flight, a transfer to another unit in the same city, by choice. He'd promised to keep checking in. Wallace had already started helping June navigate the process of handler certification, and Lucille had quietly sent over a hand-signed copy of the retirement order, framed and dated, with a note that simply read, Ellie didn't read the words out loud, but she'd placed the frame beside her bed that night, and every night since. Now, in the calm of the terminal, she drew. Not people, not buildings, just textures, fur, fabric, waves of sound drawn like soft lines bending inward as if memory could be captured in the space between silence and presence. The kind of lines that felt like Rex. Behind them, near the vending machines, a little boy clutched his ears tightly. Maybe 5 or 6 years old, pale-faced, trembling. His backpack was askew and his father knelt beside him, whispering something urgent. The The boy rocked back and forth, tears tracing silent paths down his cheeks. And then the announcement tone rang again. Sharp, distorted, too loud. The boy screamed. Not in anger, not in defiance, just a raw, reflexive cry of a nervous system overwhelmed. Ellie paused mid-sketch. Rex lifted his head. No command was given. Permission was asked. He stood slowly, padded gently across the terminal and sat beside the boy. Not too close, not intrusive, just enough for the boy to sense him. The child froze. Rex lowered himself carefully, settling his weight into the floor, and let out a low, even breath. The father looked up, startled. Is he okay? Ellie walked over, her sketchbook still in hand. He's helping, she said simply. The father blinked. How does he know? Ellie looked at Rex. Because he remembers what it feels like. Rex nudged his nose closer to the boy's knee. The child reached out, tentatively, one shaking the fur at his shoulder. Then again. Longer this time. The sobbing stopped. In the minutes that followed, nothing extraordinary happened. The terminal didn't erupt into applause. No camera caught the moment. No announcement acknowledged it. But something shifted. Quiet. Personal. Permanent. Back near the window, June watched, eyes full but hands filled. She knew better now than to interrupt a moment being built between strangers who might not speak the same language, but who understood each other all the same. Returned to her seat eventually. Rex followed, calm, tail brushing the floor once as he settled beside her again. She picked up her pencil and began drawing anew, this time a pair of hands meeting in midair. One small, one strong, and in the space between them something soft and steady. Something alive. Later, as the gate agent called boarding, Ellie stood again, her hand tightened around the leash, not out of fear, not to anchor, but to walk forward toward wherever they were going next, together. And behind them, a boy in a red hoodie, now calm and silent, watched them disappear around the corner. His fingers still remembered the feel of fur against panic, the warmth of something that didn't ask questions, that just stayed. Because sometimes the loudest truths are carried not by words or rules or protocol, but by the soft weight of a dog who has seen fear up close and learned how to lay beside it until it passes. If this story moved you, consider subscribing for more heartfelt, real-life inspired narratives like this one. I'd love to hear what part of the story stayed with you the most. Was it the moment Ellie whispered or when Rex comforted the boy at the airport gate? Tell me where you're watching from and which scene you'll remember long after the story ends. Let's talk about it in the comments.